She was supposed to be invisible. Sophia Rogers, 23 years old, art history genius turned waitress, had one job at Il Palazzo. Serve the wine, clear the plates, and disappear. But tonight, in the restaurant's most exclusive private suite, Lorenzo Pinto, New York's most feared mafia boss, is about to sign a $150 million contract to reclaim his family's ancestral Sicilian estates. The document looks perfect. The experts swear it's authentic. The ink is right. The age is right. The seal is right. Except it isn't. And Sophia, standing in the shadows with a water pitcher and a photographic memory for Renaissance iconography, has exactly one chance to do the impossible. Speak 6 words in Sicilian that will stop a catastrophic fraud, expose a deadly conspiracy, and reveal that the invisible waitress in the corner knows more about his heritage than his own historians. November rain in Manhattan was theatrical, the kind that made the city look like it belonged in a film noir. On East 57th Street, where Bentleys idled at red lights and doormen wore white gloves year-round, Illinois Palazzo rose 5 stories of limestone and old-world power. To call it a restaurant was technically accurate, but spiritually insufficient. Il Palazzo was where oligarchs brokered deals, where senators made backroom agreements, where conversations that never appeared in official records happened over $400 bottles of wine. The dress code wasn't posted because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. And moving through this temple of power every evening, carrying trays and wearing a uniform that might as well have been camouflage, was Sophia Rogers. At 23, Sophia had become an expert at eraser. Her dark hair was always pulled back so tightly it made her temples throb. Her uniform, white button-down, black vest, black slacks, was always pristine. Her expression was always pleasant but blank. She moved through the dining room like water, filling gaps, anticipating needs, never drawing attention. She was invisible by necessity because if anyone looked too closely, they might recognize her. 3 years ago, Sophia Rogers had been the youngest person to ever receive the Wythe Fellowship in Italian Renaissance Studies. Her undergraduate thesis on forgery techniques in 16th-century papal documents had been published in 2 academic journals. She'd been offered research positions at the Met, the Fic, and the Getty. Then her mother got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Elena Rogers didn't believe in 6-month prognosis. She believed in experimental treatments that cost $40,000 a month and weren't covered by insurance. Sophia had made a choice. The fellowships paid $35,000 a year. Il Palazzo's servers made that in 3 months. So she disappeared, ghosted her academic advisors, stopped answering emails from Christie's and Seabees, put her degrees in a drawer, and put on an apron instead. That was 3 years ago. 3 days after Sophia Rogers stopped being invisible, she found herself in a penthouse suite that made Il Palazzo look like a subway station. Lorenzo's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Tribeca that officially belonged to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The windows offered a view of Manhattan that looked like a particularly ambitious CGI rendering, all glittering towers and impossibly clean streets. The furniture was the kind of mid-century modern that cost more than most people's mortgages. Everything was cream and chrome and cold perfection, except for the conference room, which looked like a bunker had married a museum. The walls were lined with climate-controlled glass cases displaying artifacts that probably shouldn't exist outside of the 8C. A Bellini sketch, what looked suspiciously like a lost Tizhan study, a Xantine icon that Sophia was fairly certain had been listed as missing since 1943. She didn't ask. That was rule 1 of her new employment. Don't ask where things come from. The table itself was a slab of black walnut that could have doubled as a landing strip surrounded by 12 leather chairs that probably cost more than her Columbia tuition. At the head sat Lorenzo, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance portrait titled Portrait of Power Personified. Around him, Marco, the consigliere, looking like everyone's dangerous uncle. Elena, the lawyer with her tablet and her expression of permanent calculation. 2 bodyguards whose names Sophia didn't know and suspected she wasn't supposed to ask, and Harrison, a translator who spoke 6 languages and had the energy of a particularly nervous rabbit. This was Professor Edmund Whitmore, 70-some Oxford credentials, the kind of academic gravitas that came with 3 decades of published papers and a CBE from the Queen. Behind them rolled a security case the size of a small coffin. "Pinto," Harrison purred, extending his hand. Lorenzo shook it with exactly the amount of pressure required to convey civility without warmth. "Thank you for this second chance. I assure you, after our misunderstanding, I've been extraordinarily careful." "Show me," Lorenzo said. Professor Whitmore cleared his throat with the authority of someone who'd spent his life lecturing to people who were required to listen. "Pinto, what I'm about to present represents perhaps the most significant historical document related to your family to surface in a century." "Oh, good," Sophia thought. "We're starting with hyperbole. That's always a great sign." With theatrical precision, Whitmore unlocked the case. Inside, cushioned on burgundy velvet, lay a manuscript that made Sophia's breath catch despite her cynicism. It was a bound codex, maybe 30 pages. The vellum yellowed to the color of aged cream, the binding cracked leather that had seen centuries. The cover bore an embossed seal, a crowned lion holding a sword surrounded by text in elaborate Gothic script. "The Pinto Codex," Whitmore announced, compiled in 1478 by the Sicilian notary Antonio Benedetti, documenting 3 generations of land grants, marriage alliances, and papal dispensations granted to the Pinto family. This is not simply a deed. This is a genealogical and legal record that establishes your family's legitimate claim to the Duche of Altavilla, including the fortress of Castello and approximately 40,000 acres of Sicilian territory. Sophia was refilling water glasses, moving with the practiced invisibility she'd honed over 3 years, but her eyes were locked on the manuscript. It was beautiful. The calligraphy was exquisite, real 15th century work. She could tell from the rhythm of the script, the way certain letters connected. The vellum was genuine, properly aged with the subtle texture that only centuries could create. But something was wrong. "The provenance," Harrison interjected smoothly, "is impeccable. Recovered from the private library of the Maris of Palermo, whose family served as custodians of Sicilian noble records for 4 centuries. Professor Whitmore has spent 8 months on authentication." Whitmore nodded with the gravity of Moses presenting the tablets. "The carbon dating places the vellum between 1465 and 1485. The ink is period-appropriate iron gall compound. The binding technique matches documented 15th century Sicilian bookmaking practices. I have molecular analysis, spectroscopic data, and comparative paleographic studies. Who needs a castle this badly?" Sophia wondered, watching Lorenzo's face remain perfectly composed, while Harrison quoted a price that had 8 figures. "Wait, 40,000 acres in Sicily. That's not a castle. If you're wrong, you look like an idiot. If you're right, you're going to humiliate an Oxford professor and blow up a $200 million deal." Lorenzo was reaching for his pen. Harrison was sliding the contract forward, his smile growing wider. "The seal is wrong," Sophia's expertise insisted. "The Latin is too formal. It's a forgery." But she was 3 days into a job that paid for her mother's treatments. 3 days into not being invisible. 3 days into having a purpose beyond surviving. "If you're wrong, you lose everything." Lorenzo uncapped the pen. The sound seemed impossibly loud. "If you're right and stay silent, you're not the scholar your mother raised. You're just another person who let a lie survive because the truth was inconvenient." Sophia's mouth opened and the room held its breath, waiting for the invisible girl to speak. "Non avevo falso." It wasn't true. It was fake. The words left Sophia's mouth before her brain could stop them. 5 words in Italian that detonated in the conference room like a flashbang grenade. Time didn't slow. It stopped. Harrison's smile froze mid-expansion. Professor Whitmore's hand, reaching to point out some detail in the manuscript, hung suspended in midair. Marco's eyes snapped to Sophia with the intensity of a sniper acquiring a target. The bodyguard's hands moved toward their jackets in synchronized motion that would have been beautiful if it weren't terrifying. And Lorenzo simply stopped. The pen, millimeters from paper, held perfectly still. He didn't turn around, didn't move, just stopped. The silence was so complete, Sophia could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Could hear the faint hum of the climate control system. Could hear Harrison's breath catch like a man who'd just watched a grenade roll under his chair. "Oh God," Sophia thought, her entire body flooding with ice-cold adrenaline. Oh God, what did I just do? Then Lorenzo spoke. His voice was soft, the kind of soft that made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. Chiha Parlato. Who spoke? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Sophia's legs had turned to water. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to grip the water pitcher to keep from dropping it. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to let someone else take the blame, to disappear back into invisibility where it was safe. But she'd already jumped. Might as well enjoy the fall. I did, she said, her voice embarrassingly unsteady. Sir, Lorenzo turned in his chair slowly, deliberately, with the mechanical precision of a gun turret tracking a target. His eyes found hers across the table, and Sophia felt like she was being examined under a microscope or possibly through a rifle scope. Repeat. I said. Sophia swallowed, her throat suddenly desert dry. I said it's not true. It's fake. The room exploded. Harrison lunged forward, his polished veneer cracking like cheap paint. This is outrageous, mister. This girl is clearly sentient. Lorenzo's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The pen touched paper. Aspi and Memento. Wait a moment. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in that room's silence, it was a gunshot. Everyone turned. Security hands moved toward jackets. Harrison's smile froze. Santoro looked confused, and Lorenzo Pinto, very slowly, put down the pen and turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. His voice was soft, dangerous. She say too. Who are you? Sophia's heart hammered. Her hands shook. Her entire life was about to implode, but the fraud on that table couldn't stand. She stepped forward out of the shadows, out of invisibility. I'm the waitress, she said. Then, switching to Sicilian, the dialect her mother had taught her, the language of truth. Isto, and this document is a fraud. The room erupted. Harrison shouted. Santoro gasped. Security moved, but Lorenzo held up one hand. Everyone froze. He stared at Sophia like she was a puzzle. Spiga, explain the seal. Sophia said, voice steadier now. Pope innocent at his seal. The gold key should face Dexter right from the viewer's perspective. Standard heraldic protocol for 15th century papal bulls. Your seal shows it facing sinister. It's a real seal, probably period correct, but it's diocesan, not papal. Someone took a genuine blank document, added fraudulent text, and sealed it with the wrong seal. Crystalline silence. Then Lorenzo smiled, sharp, dangerous, Emasai. And how do you know this? Sophia took a breath. Because before I started serving your water, I spent 4 years studying papal forgery at Columbia. My mother authenticated manuscripts for the Vatican before she got sick. That seal is wrong. Lorenzo turned to Dr. Santoro. Is she right? The doctor's hands trembled as she examined the document. Finally, barely audible. See the gold key. It faces left. The temperature dropped. Lorenzo picked up the document, studied it, then set it down gently. He turned back to Sophia. What's your name? Sophia Rogers. Amuretta. Little love in Sicilian. Sentati. Not a request. Sophia sat. Lorenzo gestured to Marco. Take them to the basement. Find out who they're working for. Within seconds, Harrison and Santoro were gone, their protests fading. Lorenzo poured wine, slid a glass to Sophia. You just saved me 150 million. And probably my life. He lifted his glass. Sophia's hands shook, but she drank. It was exceptional. For 3 years, Lorenzo said, you've been invisible. Tonight, you stepped into the light. Because the truth mattered more than safety. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect. What do you want, Sophia Rogers? My job back. My mother's treatment is in 2 weeks. Basta. He pulled out his phone. You don't work for Benedetti anymore. You work for me. Authentication, collections, finding lies. He leaned forward. I need someone who sees what others miss. I'm not a criminal. Neither am I. Officially, his smile was sharp. How much does it pay? His lawyer slid over a paper. The number made Sophia choke. Per week, Lorenzo clarified. Plus full medical coverage. Any treatment. Any doctor anywhere. What's the price? Loyalty, truth, even when inconvenient. His eyes held hers. Can you do that? Sophia thought of her mother. The bills. 3 years of invisibility. Thought of the rush when truth met power and power listened. Lorenzo extended his hand. Benvenuta nella famiglia Amurita. Welcome to the family. Outside, Rain had stopped. The city glittered and Sophia Rogers, invisible for 3 years, was finally terrifyingly, gloriously seen. Sophia managed, her voice shaking. I'm not shot, but I'm also being shot at. So, mixed review. He almost smiled. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went dark. He showed her the screen. A text from an unknown number. The girl saw too much. Next time we won't miss. Sophia stared at the message. Her brilliant academic mind finally catching up to her current reality. Someone didn't want Lorenzo to buy the forgeries. Someone wanted to know where he kept his collection. And someone had just tried to kill her to keep her quiet. So, she said, her voice only shaking a little. When you said this job came with hazard pay, this is what you meant, isn't it? Lorenzo's laugh was dark. Welcome to the family business, Amuretta. Outside, sirens began to wail, and Sophia Rogers realized that stopping a $200 million fraud was easy. Surviving the people who created it was going to be significantly harder. The thing about being shot at, Sophia discovered, was that it was simultaneously exactly like the movies and nothing like them at all. In movies, bullets made elegant holes in windows, and people dove gracefully behind cover while delivering witty one-liners. In reality, the window didn't just break. It exploded in a shower of glass that sounded like 1,000 chandeliers shattering at once. The bullet didn't whistle. It made a sound like fabric ripping, followed by the meaty thunk of lead hitting plaster. And there was nothing graceful about the way Lorenzo slammed her into the floor behind his desk, his body covering hers while her lungs forgot how to process oxygen. Stay down. Marco's voice cut through the chaos as another window disintegrated. He was already moving, pulling a gun from somewhere. When did he get a gun? And barking orders into his phone in rapid-fire Italian. The bodyguards materialized like dangerous ghosts, weapons drawn, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that came from military training and probable war crimes. One was on the phone. Edificio in Costrian Lot Fume Torelto building under construction Riverside Sniper. The other was at the window staying low, eyes scanning the waterfront with professional intensity. And Sophia was on the floor under a Mafia boss, her cheek pressed against Italian marble that probably cost more per square foot than most people's cars. Her brain simultaneously screaming, "You're going to die." And this floor is surprisingly comfortable. How many shots? Lorenzo's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Like being shot at was a minor scheduling inconvenience. 3 confirmed. One of the bodyguards replied. Calibro Peasant. Professional. Heavy caliber. Can you return fire? Troppo distant. Sinuentometry. Too far. Maybe more. Another shot. Punched through what remained of the windows close enough that Sophia felt the displaced air kiss her hair. She made a sound that was probably supposed to be a scream, but came out as more of a wheeze. Breathe, Lorenzo said quietly, his mouth near her ear. Slow breaths in through your nose. You're okay. I'm being shot at, Sophia gasped. That's the literal opposite of okay. That's the dictionary definition of not okay. If you look up not okay in the thesaurus, there's probably a picture of this exact moment. You're babbling. It's a coping mechanism. Some people pray. I provide running commentary. Despite everything, the bullets, the chaos, the very real possibility of death by sniper. She heard him laugh. Quiet, brief, but genuine. Capo, Marco called. We need to move. Building's not secure. If there's one shooter, there could be more. Ground floor now. The elevators are death traps, service stairs, a dezo now. Lorenzo pulled Sophia to her feet, keeping low, his hand gripping her arm with enough force to bruise. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. Understand. Is please don't let me die an acceptable response. Ando, let's go. They moved in a tight formation, bodyguards front and back, Marco at point. Lorenzo keeping Sophia in the center like she was a particularly valuable package. They hit the service stairs at a run, their footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. 3 floors down, Marco's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, his expression darkening. Merida, they've got the lobby covered. 2 men, possibly 3. Professional setup. The kitchen exit. Lorenzo asked. Loading dock connects to the restaurant next door. Vietnamese place. Kitchen should be active. Lots of civilians, which means they can't. A door above them crashed open. Footsteps heavy and fast coming down. Corey, run. They exploded through the door marked B2 kitchen access into a humid corridor that smelled like lemongrass and fish sauce. The sounds of a busy restaurant kitchen hit them. Clanging pots, shouted orders in Vietnamese, the hiss of woks over high flame. They burst through swinging doors into chaos. A kitchen in full dinner rush. 10 cooks in white coats moving in synchronized chaos. Flames leaping from woks. Steam rising from industrial pots. Everyone froze at the sight of armed men in expensive suits crashing through their prep area. Marco shouted in his best authoritative American accent, flashing something that might have been a badge or might have been a very convincing fake. Active threat. Clear the exits. To their credit, the kitchen staff reacted with the jaded efficiency of New York restaurant workers who'd probably seen weirder things during dinner service. They scattered toward the dining room, taking their knives with them. There, Lorenzo pointed to a heavy metal door, the kind that led to service alleys, to dumpsters, to the behind-the-scenes Manhattan that tourists never saw. They hit the door at full speed, emerging into a rain-slick alley that looked like it had been designed specifically for dramatic chase scenes. The November rain had picked up again, turning the pavement into a mirror that reflected neon signs from the street beyond. A black Mercedes was already there, engine running. The driver, another bodyguard, Sophia vaguely recognized, had the back door open before they'd fully exited the building. Dentro, inside. Marco shoved Sophia toward the car. She dove into the back seat, Lorenzo right behind her. Marco and one bodyguard piled into the front. The other bodyguard stayed behind, weapon drawn, covering their exit. The car accelerated before the doors were fully closed, tires screaming on wet pavement. Sophia was thrown against Lorenzo as they took the corner at a speed that was definitely illegal and possibly suicidal. Status, Lorenzo demanded, his arm instinctively going around Sophia to keep her from being thrown around the back seat like a rag doll. 2 shooters confirmed at the lobby, Marco reported. Phone pressed to his ear. Professional team. They scattered when NYPD responded to the shots fired call. Our people are tracking them. But asked Petosa. He listened, his expression going from concern to furious. Quando what? Lorenzo's voice was deadly quiet. Harrison and Whitmore, we found them. Marco's jaw clenched. Both dead execution style about an hour ago, dumped in a parking garage in Queens. The temperature in the car dropped. So they were never the masterminds, Lorenzo said slowly. They were delivery men, and whoever hired them cleaned up loose ends the moment the deal fell through. Which means someone knew within minutes that Sophia stopped the deal. Marco added grimly. Someone was watching. Someone close. Sophia's brain running on pure adrenaline and possibly shock finally caught up to the implications. Wait, they tried to kill me because I spotted the forgery. Which means they really wanted you to accept that document, not for the money. If it was just a scam, they'd have disappeared with the deposit. But they stuck around. They sent a sniper. She looked at Lorenzo. What was on that document that was worth killing for? His expression was grim. That's the question, isn't it? The car swerved again, taking a service road that ran along the waterfront through the rain-streaked windows. Sophia could see the Manhattan skyline, beautiful, glittering, completely indifferent to the fact that she'd been shot at approximately 7 minutes ago. On a scale of occupational hazard to actively planning my funeral, how worried should I be? Lorenzo looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. You just survived a professional assassination attempt. Most people would be crying or catatonic. Most people didn't grow up with a mother who thought appropriate dinner conversation was, let's discuss the technical methods medieval poisoners used to avoid detection. Sophia took a shaky breath. Also, I'm absolutely going to have a breakdown later. Right now, I'm running on adrenaline and possibly shock. Ask me again in an hour when my brain remembers how to feel things. Despite everything, he smiled. You're remarkable. I'm a disaster held together by student debt and spite. That too. The car pulled into an underground parking garage, not a public one, but the kind that required biometric access and had cameras on every surface. They descended 3 levels into concrete and fluorescent lighting. Safe house, Marco explained, already typing on his phone. No one knows about this location except core family. We'll regroup, figure out who's trying to kill us, and plan accordingly. The car stopped. Everyone piled out with the efficient speed of people who'd done this before. Sophia stumbled slightly as her legs remembered they were made of jelly, and Lorenzo caught her arm. Easy, he said quietly. I'm fine, Sophia lied. Then because apparently near-death experiences destroyed her filter completely. So, first date's going great, really exceeded expectations. 5 stars would recommend to friends. Lorenzo stared at her for a beat. Then he laughed. Actually laughed, the sound echoing in the concrete garage. First date. Well, you bought me wine. We had dinner conversation. Someone tried to kill us. I walked away from a brilliant career to keep my mother alive. Her voice came out sharper than intended. Sorry if that doesn't fit the narrative of tragic academic genius. I made a choice. I'd make it again. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but recognition. Like he understood choices made between impossible options. And now you're working for me, he said. Doing exactly what you were trained to do, making more money than you ever would have in academia with better health care than any university would provide. He tilted his head slightly. Does that bother you? That I'm working for someone who's definitely involved in criminal enterprise? Sophia asked. Or that I'm really good at it? She considered lying. Considered giving the answer that would make her seem morally righteous or appropriately conflicted, then decided that lying to a man who probably had people killed for less than dishonesty was strategically inadvisable. Yes, she said simply, it bothers me. But not enough to stop. My mother's alive because of the money I'm making. I can live with moral ambiguity if she can live. Period. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a leather portfolio. He returned, opened it, and placed a document in front of her. It was old, 15th century by the look of it. Parchment, faded ink, elaborate seal. The text was in medieval Italian with Latin phrases interwoven. Read it, he said. Sophia leaned forward, her scholar's brain engaging automatically. The script was challenging, abbreviated Latin mixed with vernacular Italian, the kind of hybrid that took years to learn to parse correctly. It's a land transfer, she said slowly, tracing the text with her eyes. Dated 1463, transferring ownership of I think it's a vineyard near Montalcino from the Salvi family to she paused, examining a particularly elaborate signature, to someone named Pinto, your ancestor. My great-grandfather 13 times removed. He pointed to a section of text that was particularly faded. What does that say? Sophia squinted at it. The ink had degraded badly, and someone had clearly tried to restore it at some point with less than ideal results. But underneath the damage, she could see the ghost of the original text. Cootie render tense, she read, with all rights, rents, and appurtenances. Standard medieval property transfer language. She looked up at him. Because I paid $3 million for that document 5 years ago, and 3 experts told me it was authentic. Sophia looked back at the parchment, her pulse quickening. This was a test. Everything was a test with him. She examined the seal more carefully, looked at the ink patterns, studied the way the text flowed. Then she noticed something. A tiny inconsistency in the spacing. A subtle difference in ink density in one section. The document is authentic, she said slowly. But it's been altered. Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more entries. And this one, the Byzantine manuscript, also Elena, the Venetian deed from 6 months ago. Elena again. Lorenzo, she's authenticated 30% of your acquisitions in the last 2 years. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. She's been with me for 7 years, he said quietly. I trust her. Trusted, Sophia corrected gently. Past tense. Because either she's incompetent, which I doubt given her credentials, or she's compromised. Lorenzo stood, walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the Manhattan skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering like scattered jewels. My father built this empire from nothing, he said, his voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. He came from Sicily with $200 and the kind of reputation that opened doors and closed coffins. Everything I have, every business, every connection, every dollar, I inherited from a man who trusted no one and survived because of it. He turned to face her, and I trusted Elena, which makes me either a fool or soft, probably both. Sophia heard the pain beneath the words, the burden of legacy, of living up to a ghost, of trying to be as hard as the man who built everything while secretly wanting to be something more. You're not soft, she said quietly. You're careful. There's a difference. Careful people don't get betrayed by their own lawyer. Careful people hire brilliant authenticators who spot forgeries that everyone else misses. She stood, walked to him close enough to see the fine lines of tension around his eyes. You didn't fail. She did. And whoever's pulling her strings made one critical mistake. What's that? They assumed you wouldn't hire someone smarter than your experts. Sophia smiled slightly. Surprise. He laughed, tired, but genuine. You have a gift for making disasters sound like victories. I also deflect with humor and make inappropriate jokes during crisis situations. I've noticed. They stood there close enough to share breath. The city sparkling below them like a promise or a threat. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving something else in its wake. Awareness, connection, the kind of chemistry that happened when two people survived something terrible together. Sophia, Lorenzo said quietly. Why did you stop the deal? The first one at Il Palazzo. You could have stayed quiet, kept your job, stayed invisible. She thought about lying, about giving some noble answer about truth and integrity. But they'd been shot at together, had bled together, had run through rain-soaked alleys while people tried to kill them. They were past noble lies. Because I spent 3 years being invisible, she said. 3 years pretending I wasn't the smartest person in every room. 3 years failing at the only thing I was ever good at, seeing the truth. And I was so scared that if I stayed silent one more time, I'd disappear completely. I'd become the ghost I was pretending to be. She swallowed hard. I didn't speak up because it was brave. I spoke up because staying silent was a kind of death. His hand came up, cupped her face with surprising gentleness. You're terrified constantly, but you do it anyway. What choice do I have? The Sicilian endearment that meant little love, little light. You have every choice. You could run, disappear, go back to being invisible. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But you won't. How do you know? Because you're like me. His voice was rough now, intimate. You'd rather die visible than live as a ghost. The moment stretched between them. Electric, dangerous, inevitable. His hand was still on her face. Her heart was hammering. The space between them had become measurably smaller, though neither remembered moving. This is a terrible idea, Sophia whispered. Probably the worst I've had all week. We're in a safe house because people are trying to kill us. Makes it worse or better. Depending on perspective, I work for you. This violates approximately 12 HR policies. I don't have HR. That's not the defense you think it is. He smiled slow, devastating, the expression of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and was doing it anyway. Tell me to stop. She should. She absolutely should. This was insane, unprofessional, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with snipers and everything to do with the way her entire body had decided that oxygen was optional. The explosion shook the building like a giant had kicked it. The windows rattled. The lights flickered. Somewhere below them, car alarms started screaming in harmony with the sudden wail of fire alarms. Lorenzo's entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat from intimate to tactical, from almost lover to protector. He pulled Sophia behind him, his body once again serving as her shield. Marco burst through the door, gun drawn. Capo, parking garage, vehicle bomb, 3 floors down. Casualties. Our people are checking, but Marco's expression was grim. Capo, they found us. They found the safe house. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Because safe houses were supposed to be secret, known only to core family, which meant inside job confirmed, Lorenzo said, his voice deadly quiet. Someone told them where we were. His jaw clenched. How many people knew this location? 7, Marco said. You, me, the bodyguards. He paused. And Elena. I called her when we changed locations. Standard protocol. The silence was absolute. Then Lorenzo pulled out his phone, dialed a number, waited. When someone answered, his voice was arctic. Elena, we need to talk now. He hung up, looked at Sophia. The warmth from moments ago was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who just confirmed his worst suspicions. Get your things, he said quietly. We're leaving. Where are we going? His smile was sharp and absolutely terrifying. To have a conversation with my lawyer about the cost of betrayal. And Sophia realized that trust, once broken, didn't just hurt. In Lorenzo's world, it was lethal. They didn't make it to Elena. Came to them. The second safe house was in Red Hook, Brooklyn, an industrial loft that had been converted into what Sophia could only describe as minimalist panic room chic. exposed brick, steel beams, and enough surveillance equipment to make the NSA jealous. They'd been there for exactly 43 minutes when the power cut, not flickered, cut. The kind of sudden, complete darkness that was never an accident. Murda, Marco hissed, already moving. Backup generator should kick in. It didn't. They cut the gas line, Lorenzo said quietly, his voice carrying that preternatural calm that Sofia was beginning to recognize as his combat mode. Professional crew, they planned this. How many? Sofia asked, proud that her voice only shook a little. Unknown. But they wouldn't cut power unless they had numbers. He pulled a gun from somewhere. When did he get that? And pressed it into her hands. Safety's here. Point and shoot. Aim center mass. Don't hesitate. I've never shot a gun in my life. Congratulations. Tonight you learn. He moved toward the windows, staying low. Marco exits. Front door's the kill zone. Fire escape on the east side, but they'll expect that. Service stairs to the roof. Glass shattered, not from bullets this time, but from something being thrown. A bottle trailing flame tumbling through the darkness like a falling star. Molotov cocktail. Sofia's brain supplied helpfully. Because apparently we're in a war zone now. The bottle hit the floor, exploded into flame. The industrial loft, with its exposed wood and vintage furniture, began to burn with enthusiastic efficiency. Adesso, Lorenzo shouted. They ran for the service stairs, but the door burst open before they reached it. 3 men, not dressed in suits, but in tactical gear, faces covered, weapons that looked military-grade, poured through. The bodyguards returned fire. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening, apocalyptic. Sofia's ears rang. The gun Lorenzo had given her felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. One of the bodyguards went down. Not dead. She could see him moving, but bleeding. Definitely bleeding. Marco was screaming orders. Lorenzo was returning fire with the cold precision of someone who'd done this too many times. And Sofia saw the wine rack. It was one of those pretentious industrial things. All reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs filled with bottles that probably cost hundreds of dollars each. Bottles filled with alcohol. That burned. Her mother's voice crystal clear. Eleanor of Aquitaine defended her castle with burning oil and sheer audacity. Sometimes, Sofia, the best weapon is the one nobody expects. Cover me, she shouted, not knowing if anyone could hear her over the gunfire. She ran for the wine rack, grabbed 3 bottles, heavy Bordeaux, the expensive kind, and sprinted toward where the fire was spreading. She broke one bottle against the floor, soaked her scarf in it, set it alight from the already burning flames. Improvised Molotov cocktail. Thank you, misspent youth reading about medieval siege warfare. She hurled it toward the doorway where the attackers were advancing. It shattered, spread flame, forced them back with shouts of surprise. Lorenzo's voice, somewhere between horrified and impressed. She made 2 more, threw them with the accuracy of someone who'd spent summers playing softball before academia consumed her life. More fire, more chaos, more time. East window, Marco shouted. Fire, escape, they ran. Sofia grabbed the wounded bodyguard's arm, helped him stumble toward the window. He was heavy, bleeding, muttering prayers in Italian. She was small, terrified, and running on pure adrenaline and apparently a talent for medieval warfare tactics. Lorenzo shattered the window with his elbow, cleared the glass, started helping people through. Marco went first, weapon drawn, clearing the fire escape. The wounded bodyguard next, groaning in pain. Then Sofia. Then the shot came from above, from the roof where someone had been waiting. Patient and professional. The bullet caught Lorenzo in the shoulder, spun him halfway around. He was heavy, bleeding, muttering prayers in Italian. She was small, terrified, and running on pure adrenaline and apparently a talent for medieval warfare tactics. Lorenzo shattered the window with his elbow, cleared the glass, started helping people through. Marco went first, weapon drawn, clearing the fire escape. The wounded bodyguard next, groaning in pain. Then Sofia. Then the shot came from above, from the roof where someone had been waiting. Patient and professional. The bullet caught Lorenzo in the shoulder, spun him halfway around. He dropped his gun, staggered, caught himself against the window frame. Time did that thing again where it stopped meaning anything. Sofia saw him fall, saw the blood, so much blood, dark and spreading across his white shirt, saw his face go pale, saw him try to stand and fail. The training kicked in. 3 years of watching her mother's nurses, of learning to stay calm when everything was falling apart, of being functional when the world ended. She grabbed him, dragged him with strength she didn't know she had, got him through the window onto the fire escape. The metal stairs rang with footsteps. Attackers below coming up. Pressure, she said, her voice steady despite the terror. I need to stop the bleeding. Sophia, shut up. I'm concentrating. She stripped off his jacket, then his shirt, revealing the wound. Through and through, high on the shoulder, missed the artery, but bleeding badly. She pressed her scarf against it hard. He hissed in pain. Congratulations, she said, her humor a lifeline against the panic. You're not dying on my shift. I refuse to have that on my resume. Former employer, deceased from poor life choices. Despite the pain, despite the blood, despite everything, he laughed. Weak, but genuine. Dio mio, you're insane. I'm resourceful. She tied the scarf tight, makeshift pressure bandage. Can you move? Do I have a choice? Not really. Marco was back, his face grim. Car's 2 blocks away. We move now, or we don't move at all. They moved. It was a blur after that. Stumbling down fire escapes through alleys that smelled like garbage and rain. Lorenzo leaning on her more than she thought he would. Trusting her with his weight, with his life. The attackers behind them. Sirens in the distance. The city turning from sanctuary to battlefield. They made it to the car. A different one this time. Something nondescript and fast. Marco drove like he was auditioning for Formula One. Sophia kept pressure on Lorenzo's wound, her hands red with his blood, her mind eerily calm. Where are we going? She asked. Red Hook Marine Terminal, Marco said grimly. Old warehouse, one of the original family holdings. He glanced at Lorenzo in the rearview mirror. Capo, you good? Been better. Been worse. Lorenzo's voice was strained but steady. He looked at Sophia. You threw Molotov cocktails. I was inspired. You saved Harrison's life. I was helping. You're not what I expected. And the Pinto estate in Staten Island looked like something out of a Gothic novel. All wrought iron gates and overgrown gardens. The kind of place where family secrets went to fester and occasionally murder people. The mansion itself was dark except for lights blazing in the East Wing library. An invitation, a challenge, a stage set for the final act. He wants an audience, Marco muttered, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Thinks he's already won. Maybe he has, Lorenzo said quietly, his wounded shoulder bound tight beneath a fresh shirt. He'd refused painkillers, need to stay sharp, and the blood loss was making his face pale in the dashboard lights. Maybe this was always going to end here. Don't, Sophia said sharply from the back seat. Don't you dare get philosophical on me. We're walking into what is very obviously a trap, and I need you focused, not composing your tragic final monologue. Yes, doctor. They'd brought 6 men, all family, all loyal to Lorenzo's father, all armed and looking like they'd welcome an excuse for violence. But Lorenzo had been clear. This is between Vincenzo and me. Your backup, not the main event. Sophia had her phone in her pocket, recording app already running. Whatever happened in that library, there would be evidence. Truth preserved even if they didn't survive to use it. Medieval scholars didn't run toward danger, she thought as they approached the mansion. They stayed in monasteries and complained about the quality of vellum. Why didn't I become a normal academic? Because normal academics didn't save mafia bosses from forgeries, and they definitely didn't fall for dangerous men with shoulder wounds and trust issues. Fall for, her brain whispered. We're calling it that now. Shut up, she told herself. Existential crisis later. Survival now. The front door was unlocked. Another message. Come in. I'm waiting. They moved through the house like ghosts, through a foyer with dusty chandeliers, past family portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their movement, up a grand staircase that creaked with age and secrets. The library door stood open. Light spilled out, warm and inviting and absolutely treacherous. Lorenzo paused at the threshold, looked at Marco. 2 minutes. If shooting starts before then, it means diplomacy failed. Capo, 2 minutes, Lorenzo repeated. Then to Sophia, stay behind me. Obviously, I'm small and squishy. You're large and recently bullet-resistant. He almost laughed. Then he walked into the library, and Sophia followed, her phone recording everything in her pocket. Vincenzo Pinto sat in a leather chair like it was a throne. He was younger than Lorenzo, maybe 28, with the same dark hair and sharp features, but softer somehow, like a sculpture that hadn't been fully finished, handsome in a way that probably got him whatever he wanted until he encountered something that couldn't be charmed. He was also holding a gun casually, like it was a glass of wine. "Quino," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Cousin, you look terrible. Someone shoot you." Someone tried. Lorenzo moved further into the room, putting himself between Vincenzo and Sofia. Always protecting, always the shield. "Your people, I assume." "My people." Vincenzo's smile widened. "I like the sound of that. Like I'm building something, which I am actually. I'm building what should have been mine from the beginning. Papa left me the business. Papa left you everything." The charm cracked, revealing rage beneath. The business, the estate, the respect, the legacy, and what did I get? A monthly allowance and a seat at the children's table during family meetings. He stood, the gun now pointed more deliberately. "I'm older than you were when you took over. Smarter, better educated, but you were his favorite, his heir, his perfect soldier son. So you tried to destroy me." Lorenzo's voice was calm, but Sofia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his right hand hovered near his concealed weapon. The forgeries, the tracking devices, the assassination attempts. All because you're jealous. "I'm realistic," Vincenzo corrected. "You're weak, Lorenzo. You hire outsiders." His eyes flicked to Sofia with contempt. "You trust people who aren't blood. You try to legitimize what Papa built instead of expanding it. You're making us soft." "I'm keeping us alive," Lorenzo said quietly. "Papa's methods worked in his time. This is different. This is surrender." Vincenzo's voice rose. "You've forgotten what we are, what this family was built on. Blood and fear and power." He gestured with the gun. "I'm going to remind them, starting with you." Sofia's heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. The phone in her pocket was recording every word, every confession, every self-incriminating rant about assassination and betrayal. Just keep him talking, she thought. Give Marco time to position people. Give the recording time to upload to cloud storage. "You commissioned the forgeries," Lorenzo said. "It wasn't a question. Used Elena to authenticate them. Planted tracking devices to map my collection." He gestured to Sofia. "And how did you know?" Vincenzo's smile turned cruel. "Because our dear cousin fell in love with his new toy. Elena's been reporting every authentication, every conversation, every detail about your little scholar. I knew the moment she walked into that meeting that she'd spot the forgeries. I counted on it." "Wait," Sofia said, the pieces clicking. "You wanted me to expose the forgeries." "Of course." Vincenzo's gun shifted to point at her, and Lorenzo tensed. If Fabiano had bought those documents, he'd have looked like a fool, buying obvious fakes. But if his brilliant new authenticator spotted them, saved him millions, proved her worth, it made him trust her completely. And it made you both targets for elimination when you inevitably got too close to the truth. Lorenzo's voice was deadly quiet. The assassination attempts, the safe house being compromised, all of it was to drive us here. To this room, this conversation, exactly, Vincenzo said. Because killing you in some alley doesn't send the right message. But killing you in the family library, the heart of Papa's empire, after you've confessed your weakness, your betrayal of everything he built, that tells the right story. My story. Sofia felt the cold certainty of inevitability settling over the room. They'd walked into this trap willingly, led here step by someone who'd been playing a longer game than any of them had realized. But Vincenzo had made one mistake. He'd been so focused on his grand finale, on his dramatic revelation, that he'd forgotten one crucial detail. Sofia's phone was still recording. And Lorenzo, despite his wounds, despite the betrayal, despite everything, was not the weak man Vincenzo thought he was. Lorenzo's hand moved so fast Sofia barely saw it. The gun he'd concealed was out and firing before Vincenzo could react. Vincenzo's shot went wide, shattering a priceless first edition. Lorenzo's didn't. It caught Vincenzo in the shoulder, spun him around, sent his gun skittering across the marble floor. Sofia moved without thinking, diving for the weapon. Her academic reflexes were no match for desperation. She slid across the floor, grabbed the gun just as Vincenzo, bleeding and furious, lurched toward her. The gun skittered away. Marco was there instantly, pulling her off, restraining Vincenzo with efficient brutality. But Sofia didn't care about Vincenzo anymore. She crawled to Lorenzo, her hands immediately finding the wound. High chest, bleeding badly, his breathing shallow and wrong. No, 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 she heard herself saying, pressure on the wound. Her hands red again. Everything red again. You don't get to die? You promised me dinner. Expensive dinner. You can't die before you pay your debts. That's just bad business. His eyes opened, found hers. He tried to smile and managed something that was half grimace, half genuine amusement. You ruined my business meeting, he murmured, his voice thread thin. I saved your life twice. You're welcome. Tears were streaming down her face, mixing with blood and gunpowder residue. Stay awake. Stay with me. Please, Lorenzo. Paravor. Amuretta, he whispered. Little love. Don't you dare little love me, and then die. That's cheating. That's emotional manipulation. Her voice broke. You have to stay. I can't need you to know. His hand found hers, gripped with surprising strength. You're not invisible. Never were from the first moment. Saw you. Save your breath. Ambulance is coming. Love you, he said quietly. Simple, final, true. Had to say it. His eyes closed. Sophia's scream tore through the library. Lorenzo. Marco was there, phone to his ear, shouting for paramedics. Someone was doing chest compressions. Someone else was saying medical words that sounded like death sentences. And Sophia held his hand, her brilliant mind that could spot forgeries and speak dead languages and survive bullets completely useless against the reality of the man she loved bleeding out on a library floor. Please, she whispered to God or fate or anyone listening. Please don't take him. Not now. Not like this. The sirens were getting closer, but Lorenzo's hand in hers was getting colder. And Sophia Rogers, who'd faced down assassins and betrayal and her own fear, finally understood that some truths were too painful to survive. 6 weeks later, the New York Times headline read, Massive art forgery ring exposed. Federal investigation uncovers 150 million fraud scheme. The Wall Street Journal went with Renaissance document forgeries traced to international criminal network. Art News, always more dramatic, proclaimed, the waitress who saved the art world. How one scholar exposed a forgery empire. Sophia ignored them all. She had better things to do than read about herself in the third person, like explaining to her mother why she was quitting her job at Il Palazzo. You're doing what? Elena Rogers sat in her sunny kitchen in Queens, looking healthier than she had in 3 years. The experimental treatment was working slowly, imperfectly, but working. Her hair was growing back in silver streaks that she claimed made her look distinguished. Joy, hope, a future that didn't involve looking over his shoulder constantly. From inside, she heard the soft clink of glasses. Marco had left Champagne because apparently even deadly serious conciliary approved of romance when it involved people who'd bled together. Lorenzo retrieved the glasses, returned to the balcony where Sophia waited in the rain. He handed her one, kept the other, and raised it in a toast. To the waitress who said, "This is fake," he said solemnly. Sophia raised her glass, her smile bright enough to rival the city lights. To the Mafia boss who listened, they drank. The champagne was exceptional, probably cost more than her old monthly rent. Everything in Lorenzo's world was excessive, expensive, edged with danger. She wouldn't have it any other way. He set down his glass, took hers, set it aside. Then he pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it tasted like rain and champagne and promises kept. It tasted like truth, messy and complicated, and absolutely worth it. The city sparkled below them. 8 million people living their lives, none of them knowing that on a balcony in Tribeca, a scholar and a reformed criminal were writing their own ending, or maybe their beginning. Because the truth was, Sophia Rogers had stopped being invisible the moment she chose to speak. And Lorenzo Pinto had stopped being alone the moment he chose to listen. Everything else, the money, the danger, the headlines, was just details. What mattered was this: a woman brave enough to tell the truth, and a man wise enough to value it more than anything money could buy. As the rain fell, and the city lights shimmered, and the champagne went flat because they were too busy kissing to drink it, Sophia thought about her mother's words from years ago. Truth doesn't negotiate, Sophia. It simply is. She'd been right, and the truth was simple. Love, like authentic art, couldn't be forged. It could only be recognized, protected, and cherished. Everything else was just expensive fakery. 3 months later, the Times ran a smaller article on page B7. Lorenzo Pinto, Italian-American businessman and art collector, announced today the establishment of the Elena Rogers Foundation for Renaissance Studies, a fully funded scholarship program for students pursuing authentication and preservation of historical documents. The foundation will be directed by Dr. Sophia Rogers, whose expertise recently exposed one of the largest art fraud rings in recent history. When asked for comment, Mr. Pinto stated simply, "Truth is worth protecting. This is how we protect it." The article included a photo. Lorenzo and Sophia at the foundation's opening, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder, both of them smiling at something off camera. They looked, a casual observer might note, like people who'd survived something terrible together and come out the other side stronger. They looked, a more astute observer might recognize, like people in love. They looked, Sophia's mother would later say while framing the article, like they belonged together. And for once, everyone was telling the truth. Sophia started invisible and ended up seen. Lorenzo started alone and ended up loved. And you just experienced a story about truth, courage, and the kind of love that's worth fighting for. If you want more stories that make you feel something, stories that remind you why romance and danger and wit make the perfect combination, then subscribe. We're building a community of people who believe in powerful storytelling. Join us, click subscribe, explore our other videos, and let's keep telling stories that matter. See you in the comments. Tell me your favorite moment from this. 2 years after the Elena Rogers Foundation opened its doors, Sophia stood in the newly renovated Renaissance wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, watching Lorenzo charm a room full of New York's cultural elite. The transformation had been remarkable, not just of the man she'd fallen in love with, but of everything around him. The criminal empire his father had built was now a legitimate business empire. Real estate development, art authentication services, security consulting. The same skills that had made him dangerous in one world made him formidable in another. His businesses were thriving, his reputation rehabilitated, and his tax returns could withstand any scrutiny. It had taken 18 months of careful restructuring, FBI cooperation, and what Lorenzo called strategic transparency. He'd turned state's evidence against the remaining elements of his father's organization, providing information that had dismantled 3 rival families and earned him a presidential pardon. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been threats, attempts on his life, and a 6-month period when they'd lived under federal protection while the last of the old guard was rounded up. But Lorenzo had been patient, methodical, willing to sacrifice short-term power for long-term legitimacy. And now here they were, at a gala celebrating the museum's acquisition of a collection of Renaissance manuscripts that the foundation had helped authenticate. Sophia watched him work the room, noting how different he looked now. Still devastatingly handsome, still commanding attention wherever he went. But there was something lighter about him. The constant tension she'd noticed when they first met had eased. He laughed more easily, smiled without calculation, touched her hand in public without checking for threats first. "Dr. Rogers," a voice beside her said, startling her from her observations. She turned to find Dr. Catherine Morrison, the Met's chief curator, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "I wanted to thank you again for your work on the Medici correspondence. Your authentication saved us from what could have been a very embarrassing acquisition." Sophia accepted the champagne gratefully. "Just doing my job, Catherine. Though I have to admit, it's more satisfying when the documents turn out to be authentic instead of elaborate frauds." Catherine laughed. "I imagine so. Though your reputation for spotting forgeries has made you something of a legend in authentication circles. I hear the Vatican has been trying to poach you for months." "They have," Sophia confirmed. "But I'm quite happy where I am." She gestured toward the room, toward Lorenzo, who was deep in conversation with the museum's director about funding for a new authentication lab. "Besides, someone has to keep an eye on him. Make sure he doesn't start collecting stolen art again." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, and Sophia realized she'd been more candid than was probably wise. "That was a joke," Sophia added quickly. "A very poorly timed joke about his reformed businessman status." Catherine looked relieved, though she clearly wasn't entirely sure what to make of Sophia's comment. "Of course. Well, I should go mingle. Enjoy the evening, Dr. Rogers." As Catherine walked away, Sophia felt familiar arms slip around her waist from behind. Making jokes about my criminal past again, Lorenzo murmured in her ear. It's becoming a habit. You love it when I'm inappropriate at cultural events. It keeps things interesting. True, he agreed, turning her around to face him. But perhaps we should save the crime jokes for when we're not surrounded by federal agents and museum board members. Sophia glanced around, suddenly noticing the subtle presence of security that went beyond the usual museum guards. There are federal agents here, too, Lorenzo said casually. Agent Martinez and Agent Chun. They're here socially, but they also like to keep an eye on my public appearances. Makes them feel better about the whole pardoned ex-mob boss thing. Does that bother you? Sophia asked. The surveillance, the scrutiny, the fact that we'll probably never be completely free of suspicion. He considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. The idea of federal oversight, of having to justify every business decision, every acquisition, every friendship, would have felt like a cage. But now, he shrugged. Now I sleep through the night. I don't check for bombs under my car. I can take you to dinner without bringing a security detail. If the price of legitimacy is occasional federal babysitting, I'll pay it gladly. The museum gala continued around them, a carefully choreographed dance of wealth, culture, and social positioning. Sophia found herself marveling at how seamlessly they'd integrated into this world. Lorenzo had donated millions to cultural institutions, funded scholarship programs, endowed university chairs in Renaissance studies. His name now appeared on museum plaques alongside Rockefeller's and Morgan's, his past reframed as a cautionary tale of redemption rather than a criminal history. But late at night, when it was just the two of them in their penthouse overlooking Central Park, Sophia sometimes wondered if Lorenzo missed it. The danger, the absolute power, the respect born of fear rather than admiration. If you're wondering whether I miss the old life, he said quietly, reading her thoughts with the intuition that came from 2 years of intimate partnership, the answer is no. Not the violence, not the paranoia, not the constant threat of betrayal or death. But there are things I miss. Such as the clarity, he said after a moment. In that world, you always knew where you stood. Enemies were enemies, allies were allies, and the rules were simple. In this world, everything is more complicated. Business competitors smile at you over lunch while planning to destroy you. Politicians promise support while taking money from your rivals. Art dealers authenticate forgeries while claiming moral superiority. It's a different kind of danger, but it's still dangerous. Is that why you keep me around? Sophia teased. To help you navigate the moral complexities of the legitimate art world. Among other reasons, he smiled, pulling her closer. Though your ability to spot fraudulent Renaissance documents has proven surprisingly useful in boardroom negotiations as well. How so? Last month, Harrison Industries tried to present me with a supposedly ironclad development contract for a property in Sicily. The same Sicily that I supposedly have ancestral claims to, thanks to that forged document we encountered 2 years ago. Sophia's eyes sharpened with interest. They were trying to use your fake heritage against you. Exactly. The contract was beautiful, professional, completely legitimate. Except for one small detail. The property descriptions used land measurements that weren't standardized in Sicily until 1892. The contract claimed to be based on records from 1847. You caught the anachronism. I caught the anachronism. And when I pointed it out, along with several other subtle discrepancies, Harrison Industries suddenly became much more reasonable about their terms. They also stopped trying to convince me that I had moral obligations to develop land that my ancestors supposedly owned. Sophia laughed. You've become quite the detective yourself. 2 years of watching you work has been educational. Though I still think you should have taken that position at the Vatican. The papal archives would be lucky to have you. And leave you alone to fend off corporate fraud without me. Absolutely not. Someone needs to watch your back, and I've become rather attached to the job. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marco, who approached with the discreet efficiency that marked him as security rather than a social guest. He leaned in close to Lorenzo, spoke quietly for a moment, then stepped back with an expression that Sophia had learned to read as controlled concern. What is it? She asked, recognizing the subtle shift in Lorenzo's posture that meant business was intruding on their evening. Nothing urgent, Lorenzo assured her. Just a complication with the Sicilian project. Apparently, our friends at Harrison Industries weren't satisfied with being outmaneuvered. They've decided to go public with their claims about my family's historical property rights. There's going to be an article in tomorrow's Times. Sophia felt a familiar chill of apprehension. What kind of article? The kind that suggests I'm using forged documents and fabricated genealogies to claim ownership of Italian real estate that doesn't belong to me. The kind that implies I'm still running scams, just with better lawyers and public relations. His jaw tightened slightly. The kind that could destroy everything we've built. How bad is it? Marco answered for him. Bad enough that we should probably leave early and start making phone calls. The article goes live at midnight, and by morning, every business partner, every federal contact, every museum board we're associated with will be asking questions. Sophia set down her champagne glass with deliberate calm. Then we better have good answers. Because I'll be damned if I let Harrison Industries destroy your reputation with the same kind of fraudulent documentation they tried to use in their contract. The ride home was tense, filled with phone calls to lawyers, public relations firms, and what Lorenzo diplomatically referred to as media contacts. Sophia listened to the conversations, her mind already working through the problem with the analytical precision that had made her reputation in authentication circles. By the time they reached their penthouse, she had a plan. We fight it with truth, she said as Lorenzo poured himself a scotch with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be given the circumstances. We don't just deny their claims. We expose them. How do you mean? We do what I do best. We authenticate their evidence and prove it's fraudulent. If Harrison Industries is making claims about your family's historical property rights, they have to have documents to support those claims. Documents that I'm willing to bet are either forged or misrepresented. Lorenzo paused, glass halfway to his lips. You want to go on the offensive? I want to destroy them, Sophia said quietly. The same way they're trying to destroy you. With better research, superior documentation, and the kind of scholarly precision that makes their fraud look amateurish. But that means getting access to their evidence. And if they're smart, they won't just hand it over. Then we make them hand it over. Challenge them publicly. Demand to examine their documentation. Put them in a position where refusing to cooperate makes them look like they're hiding something. Marco looked up from his phone where he'd been monitoring early online reactions to leaked portions of the article. It could work, he said thoughtfully. But it's risky. If their documentation is genuine, or if they've created forgeries sophisticated enough to fool preliminary examination, it could backfire spectacularly. Then we better be very, very good at what we do, Sophia replied. She moved to Lorenzo's side, took the scotch from his hand, and set it aside. Listen to me, she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she'd used 2 years ago when stopping a fraud worth $150 million. You are not the man your father was. You have not committed the crimes they're going to imply you've committed. And I will be damned if I let anyone destroy what we've built together with lies and fake documents. His hands came up to frame her face, the gesture achingly familiar from a dozen moments of crisis over the past 2 years. Are you sure about this? Fighting them publicly means opening our lives to scrutiny. Every transaction, every relationship, every decision we've made will be examined. They'll dig into your background too. Your academic career, your mother's illness, the circumstances of how we met. There won't be any privacy left. I stopped being invisible 2 years ago, Sophia reminded him. And I didn't do it just to hide again the first time someone tried to intimidate us. Besides, she smiled with the kind of dangerous confidence that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. I've had 2 years to learn your business. I know where all the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. And I know how to make sure the right story gets told. The next morning, the New York Times article hit like a precision strike. The headline read, Renaissance Fraud or Modern Scam, and the piece was a masterclass in innuendo disguised as journalism. It questioned Lorenzo's transformation from crime family heir to legitimate businessman, suggested his charitable foundations were money laundering operations, and implied that his relationship with Sophia was part of an elaborate scheme to use her academic credentials to authenticate fraudulent historical documents. The article presented what appeared to be compelling evidence, historical records suggesting the Pinto family had never owned property in Sicily, genealogical research indicating Lorenzo's ancestry had been fabricated, and expert testimony from historians who claimed the documents supporting his heritage claims were obvious forgeries. By 10 a.m., Lorenzo's phone was ringing constantly. Museum boards demanding explanations, business partners expressing concern, federal agents requesting meetings. The carefully constructed legitimacy of the past 2 years seemed to be crumbling in real time. But Sophia was ready. At 11 a.m., she held a press conference at the Elena Rogers Foundation's Manhattan office. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that made her look both scholarly and formidable, she faced a room full of reporters with the calm authority of someone who had spent years presenting research to hostile academic audiences. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I'm here to address the allegations made against Lorenzo Pinto in this morning's Times article, and to provide some much-needed context about the documents in question." She gestured to a screen behind her where the first image appeared. This is the document that Harrison Industries claims proves the Pinto family never owned land in Sicily. It's a very impressive forgery. Murmurs rippled through the room as Sophia clicked to the next image, a detailed close-up of the document's seal. Note the heraldic elements here. The lion faces sinister, which is correct for this time period. The Latin inscriptions use appropriate period terminology. The vellum appears properly aged. Someone did excellent work creating this forgery. But they made 3 critical mistakes. She clicked again, highlighting specific sections of the document. First, the ink composition. While iron gall ink is correct for the period, this particular mixture includes synthetic Prussian blue, which wasn't developed until 1704. This document claims to be from 1543. Second, the binding technique. The leather shows evidence of chrome tanning, which wasn't invented until 1858. And third, and most damning, the watermark in the paper. It's a Fabriano mill mark that can be precisely dated to 1987. The room was completely silent now, the only sound the clicking of cameras and the scratch of pens on paper. Harrison Industries has accused Lorenzo Pinto of using fraudulent documents to support false heritage claims, Sophia continued. But the only fraudulent documents in this case are the ones they've created to support their accusations. This is a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to destroy a man's reputation and business interests using the exact same techniques they claim to be exposing. She paused, allowing that to sink in before delivering the final blow. "I have spent the last 12 hours conducting a preliminary analysis of every document Harrison Industries has presented as evidence. Without exception, they are forgeries. Clever forgeries, expensive forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. And I am prepared to stake my professional reputation, my academic credentials, and my personal integrity on that assessment." The questions came like an avalanche after that, but Sophia was ready for all of them. When asked about her relationship with Lorenzo and potential bias, she pointed to her track record of exposing fraudulent documents regardless of who might be embarrassed. When questioned about Lorenzo's criminal past, she acknowledged it directly while emphasizing his cooperation with federal authorities and his legitimate business record since his transformation. When pressed about the implications for Harrison Industries, she was coolly professional but devastating. If a company is willing to create fraudulent historical documents to destroy a business competitor, what does that say about their integrity in other areas? I would strongly suggest that anyone considering business relationships with Harrison Industries demand very thorough documentation of their claims. By the time the press conference ended, the narrative had shifted completely. Within hours, Harrison Industries was on the defensive, their executives declining to comment, and their lawyers issuing carefully worded non-denial denials. By evening, several of their business partners were publicly distancing themselves, and the FBI had announced an investigation into the fraudulent documents. 3 weeks later, Harrison Industries filed for bankruptcy, their reputation destroyed, and their business partnerships dissolved. 4 of their executives were indicted for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The lead investigative reporter who had written the original Times article issued a public apology and a detailed explanation of how he'd been manipulated by sophisticated false evidence. And Lorenzo Pinto's reputation was not only restored but enhanced. His gracious handling of the crisis, combined with Sophia's brilliant public defense, had transformed him from a pardoned ex-criminal into a victim of corporate malfeasance. The narrative of redemption was complete. 6 months after the Harrison Industries scandal, Lorenzo and Sophia were married in a small ceremony in the garden of the Elena Rogers Foundation building. The guest list was an interesting mix of federal agents, museum curators, reformed criminals, and academic colleagues. Sophia's mother, now fully recovered and working part-time as a manuscript consultant, walked her down the aisle while Marco, impeccable in his role as best man, kept discreet watch for any uninvited guests who might bring more than wedding gifts to the celebration. The ceremony was officiated by Father Michael Romano, the priest who had counseled Lorenzo during his transition away from his family's criminal enterprise. He spoke about redemption, about the power of truth to transform lives, and about the kind of love that could survive bullets, betrayal, and newspaper headlines. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed tasted like victory and promises kept, like a future built on legitimate foundations and shared purpose. The reception was held in the Foundation's library, surrounded by the carefully authenticated Renaissance manuscripts that had become both Sophia's profession and their shared passion. They danced their first dance to Sinatra's The Way You Look Tonight while their guests, an unlikely collection of people who had learned to see past surfaces to the truth beneath, celebrated a love story that had begun with fraud and transformed into something absolutely authentic. Later that evening, as they stood on the balcony of their penthouse overlooking the city that had witnessed their entire courtship, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From invisible waitress to celebrated authenticator, from terrified witness to confident public speaker, from victim of circumstances to master of her own destiny. Lorenzo had changed too, from dangerous criminal to legitimate businessman, from isolated autocrat to beloved partner, from man who inspired fear to someone who commanded genuine respect. They had both become more than they had been, not despite their complicated beginning, but because of it. "Do you ever wonder," Sophia asked as they watched the city lights sparkle below them, "what would have happened if I hadn't spoken up that night at Il Palazzo? If I'd stayed invisible and let you sign that fraudulent contract?" Lorenzo considered the question seriously. "You would have saved me $150 million in the short term," he said finally. "But I would have lost everything in the long term. My legitimacy, my future, probably my life. And I would never have known what I was missing." He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist as they had so many times during their journey together. "But more than that, you would have lost yourself. Stayed invisible, stayed afraid, stayed small. And the world would have been deprived of one of its most brilliant minds working in service of truth rather than hidden in the shadows. That's the real tragedy we avoided. Not financial fraud, but human potential wasted." They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not just love but purpose, not just partnership but transformation. The city stretched out below them, 8 million lives being lived, 8 million stories being written, none of them knowing that on a balcony in Tribeca, a scholar and a reformed criminal were planning their next authentication project, their next charitable foundation, their next chapter in a love story that had begun with 6 words in Sicilian and evolved into something that would endure far beyond headlines and scandals. Because truth, as Sophia's mother had always said, doesn't negotiate. It simply is. And the truth was that Sophia Rogers and Lorenzo Pinto, despite all odds and obstacles, despite bullets and betrayals and newspaper scandals, had found something worth more than any castle in Sicily, any collection of Renaissance manuscripts, any business empire or academic reputation. They had found each other, and that, more than any document they would ever authenticate, was genuine beyond question. 1 year later, Dr. Sophia Pinto published her definitive academic work on Renaissance forgery techniques, a book that became the standard text in authentication studies worldwide. The dedication read simply, "To Lorenzo, who taught me that the most important truths are the ones we choose to live by. And to my mother, Elena, who taught me that truth doesn't negotiate. It simply is." Lorenzo Pinto's business empire continued to grow, his reputation for integrity becoming legendary in industries that had once shunned anyone with his background. He endowed chairs at 3 major universities, funded archaeological expeditions in Sicily, and established a scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents, giving them opportunities his own father's choices had nearly denied him. But his greatest achievement, he would tell anyone who asked, was convincing a brilliant woman to trust him with her truth and learning to be worthy of that trust. Together, they built something that no forger could replicate, no scandal could destroy, and no amount of money could buy. They built a life based on authentic love, genuine respect, and the shared understanding that the best endings are actually new beginnings. And every evening, as they stood on their balcony overlooking Manhattan, they remembered the night when 6 words in Sicilian changed everything. And they were grateful for the courage it takes to speak truth to power, the strength it takes to transform a life, and the wisdom it takes to recognize that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones that can't be authenticated by any expert except the heart that claims them. 5 years later, when their daughter Elena Sofia Pinto spoke her first words in 3 languages and showed an alarming tendency to examine her picture books for historical accuracy, they knew their story would continue in ways they could never have imagined. Truth, it turned out, was not just worth protecting. It was worth passing down. And love, like the finest Renaissance art, only became more valuable with time.